How did an alternate route out west end with a war between Native Americans and settlers? Here's how a trail that cut through Native American territory ended in catastrophe. Tales of the Oregon Trail have captured the imagination for generations and taught people exactly what dysentery is. Maybe it's the myth-making appeal of self-made, rugged individuals charting their way westward across a vast grassland in search of a better life. Of course, there was nothing idyllic or even remotely appealing about walking, yes, walking, about 2,200 miles along with 500,000 strangers. The traditional Oregon Trail, the one we think of today, ended fairly north, either Oregon or Washington, depending on how much you want to fight about it on the internet. There were other paths off the main trail that went further south, like the Bozeman Trail. The Bozeman Trail broke off from the Oregon Trail around modern-day Glen Rock, Wyoming, and terminated around Virginia City near Nevada's southwestern corner. If you're not watching this with a map in front of you, that's basically the middle of Wyoming, closer to the Nebraska side, all the way to Nevada where it starts to angle in. Well over 1,000 miles of walking. There was one problem with the Bozeman Trail. It cut through Native American territory not open to travelers. In 1864, less than 1 year after pioneer John Bozeman first carved the trail, 2,000 settlers followed behind him largely in the hopes of discovering gold. The other problem is that it's nowhere near Bozeman, Montana, or Montana for that matter, but that's more of a modern problem for us. More on this later. The tribes along the Oregon Trail generally left settlers alone or engaged in friendly trade.
I like your horse.
All in all, records indicate that 362 pioneers, give or take, died from tribal attacks from 1840 to 1860, largely along one certain stretch of the route starting west of Wyoming. Again, these were the friendly tribes, too. The Bozeman Trail, on the other hand, crossed through land belonging to the Lakota Sioux. And we say belonging because the land didn't only consist of traditional hunting grounds. The U.S. government agreed to legally grant it to the Sioux as part of the 1851 Horse Creek Treaty. A bunch of tribes were involved in these proceedings, including the Cheyenne and Arapaho. Each group got a different parcel of land, as well as $50,000 in damages per year, a whopping $2 million modernly for 50 years. Naturally, the treaty lasted about 2 minutes before settlers kept plowing through the territory regardless of who owned what. This type of treaty violation was well underway by the time John Bozeman and his friend John Jacobs forged out onto what we now call the Bozeman Trail. In response, the Sioux joined with the Arapaho and Northern Cheyenne and took up arms. By 1866, the U.S. Army had intervened. Things went about as well as you'd expect when they started building forts along the Bozeman Trail to protect settlers, set aside the fact that they were in violation of a treaty against Native American tribes. So the settlers weren't supposed to be there, and the Army built forts where they weren't supposed to. You want to guess what that meant? Yep. It effectively transformed the Bozeman Trail into a military road. Amongst endless smaller skirmishes, 3 conflicts in particular soured the Army on protecting the Bozeman Trail: the Fetterman Fight, the Hayfield Fight, and the Wagon Box Fight. The U.S. Army got worked in the Fetterman Fight, and most of the tribes didn't even have guns. The Hayfield Fight wasn't any better for the U.S. because the Cheyenne and Sioux had guns for that one. The last battle, that Wagon Box Fight in 1867, stands out because it featured 19 soldiers and 6 civilians holding off against 500 native warriors for about 8 hours straight.
You fight like Comanche.
Calling them fights is really a kind rewording of the results. The U.S. Army really got it handed to them in what is commonly known today as Red Cloud's War. To make a long story short, the Bozeman Trail simply wasn't worth it. Soldiers who stayed at the fort started losing their minds from the constant tension and threat of attack, especially at Fort C.F. Smith. Ultimately, the U.S. signed yet another treaty, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, that saw the Army abandon their forts along the Bozeman Trail and once again vow to keep their hands off the various tribal hunting grounds. And that was it. The Bozeman Trail tribes and the U.S. government carried on peacefully after that, for about 12 years when the U.S. just annexed the territory, and about 12 years after that, we got ourselves the state of Wyoming. But that will be for another video. As for John Bozeman, he gave things up early in 1864, settled near his own self-named pass. So yes, John Bozeman, who named the trail after himself, barely used the trail. As you probably realized, yes, Bozeman, Montana is named for him. He founded the city. He died 3 years later while traveling along the Yellowstone River. He was either killed by members of the Blackfeet tribe, which would be ironic, or by one of his business partners for flirting with their wife. Either way, Bozeman's name should be associated a lot more with violence than you ever imagined.